You gotta watch what you're doing. Yeah.
Cannabis is our commonest illegal drug. Many people don't fully know its damaging effects, especially on the brain. There are well over 15,000 scientific papers now on cannabis. It's a depressant, so it slows down the brain, and a mild hallucinogen, so it distorts the way you see and hear things. It's usually smoked. Can you not hear? It's usually smoked with or without tobacco. Is that better? No?
Yes.
Or eaten in hash cakes and taken for euphoria, a high, but it doesn't always work. People may feel worse, much worse. They may become anxious, panic, become paranoid, or even suffer a psychotic episode. This is how drugs work in the brain. I was a biology teacher, so that gives some clue as to why you're going to now get a biology lesson. Messages pass along nerve fibres as minute electrical impulses and cross the gap, the synapse between nerve cells as chemicals called neurotransmitters. These are the brain's natural drugs, and there are dozens of them. Each neurotransmitter molecule has a specific shape that fits into its own receptor site on the next cell as a key fits into a lock. This is a better diagram of it. Mind-altering drugs operate at these synapses. They either mimic the neurotransmitter by shape, increase the rate at which they're released, block them, or prevent them from being reabsorbed. In other words, they take control of the brain, and when I'm talking to children, I point out, no person can do that, no parent, no teacher, no friend. They can't control your brain, but drugs can, and do. The substance that gives the high, tetrahydrocannabinol, THC for short, mimics a neurotransmitter called anandamide. Receptor sites for anandamide, and therefore THC, are found in many parts of the brain and on other cells of the body, so its effects are widespread. THC is fat-soluble, so it persists in the fatty membranes of brain cells for a long time. 50% will be there after a week, and 10% still a month later. And traces are found in hair and urine for weeks after that. Now, this clogging up of the cells by THC interferes with the transmission of all the neurotransmitters, so functioning of the whole brain is impaired. In the 60s and 70s, the average THC content of herbal cannabis was around 1 to 3%. It's hardly available now. In the UK today, in specially bred varieties like skunk, the THC content averages 14 to 16%, and 80 to 90% of the cannabis seized in Britain, and mostly grown there in factories or farms, is the strong skunk type. The rest is hashish, or resin, which is around 4 or 5% THC. Old-fashioned herbal cannabis had approximately equal amounts of the substances THC and CBD, which is cannabidiol. Now, CBD is thought to have antipsychotic properties that counteract those of THC, in other words, works against it. And recently, it's been found that skunk contains virtually no CBD, so any activity of THC is no longer moderated. Long-term effects, how the brain can be affected. Cannabis users can develop an overpowering craving for the drug, and this is psychological dependence. Most drugs that can be abused, heroin, cocaine, alcohol, nicotine, cannabis, all increase the amount of dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter that gives pleasure. It's also increased by eating, listening to music, and so on. However, when it's produced, it also results in the production of two other substances. One that reduces the production of itself, it's called negative feedback, that's the production of dopamine goes down, so you need more to get the same effect, and that, of course, is tolerance. The other makes new connections in receptor sites between nerve cells, making the brain much more sensitive to the drug and reminding it how good the feeling was. And these cravings can persist for a long, long time and come back months later or even years after a person has stopped. And even the sight of drug equipment can trigger them. But people can get a high from their own neurotransmitters. Exercise in particular will increase the amount of dopamine. That's why people enjoy jogging. The difference is that their brains are still in control. This is a world away from stuffing the brain with chemicals to get the same effect. That way the brain loses control and the results will be entirely unpredictable and often tragic. Physical dependence happens when cannabis takes the place of the natural anandamide. Now, because the brain is being given a substitute, production of the anandamide drops. And if a person then stops taking cannabis, the receptor sites are left empty and wanting their fill. They have to be filled, otherwise you get the withdrawal symptoms with their distressing and uncomfortable feelings of irritability, sleeplessness, anxiety, depression, and sometimes even violence. Withdrawal from cannabis is not so dramatic as that from heroin, as THC persists for a long, long time in the cells, only slowly draining out. It's estimated that of everyone who tries cannabis, 10% will become addicted, and there's no foolproof cure for any form of addiction. The numbers in Britain, 12,865 in treatment, are the highest ever. Anxiety, apathy, opting out have all resulted from cannabis use. The risk of clinical depression is doubled, even in users who only use once a week. But it's the link with other mental illnesses that causes most concern. Increasing evidence shows that cannabis can cause psychosis. There are long-term studies of users, and there's evidence of increased dopamine in the brain. Users generally recover completely. Some need help from antipsychotic drugs, but it may take a few weeks. Admissions to hospitals in Britain for cannabis-related mental illnesses have dramatically increased since down classification in 2004, as has the number of 9 to 15-year-olds seeking psychiatric help for drug abuse, 60% of them citing cannabis as their main problem. Professor Robin Murray is currently conducting experiments at London's Institute of Psychiatry and finding that giving THC to healthy volunteers can indeed produce psychosis, fortunately without lasting damage. It's simply a matter of how much you give them. It will happen. And there's an added problem, because 1 in 4 of us carries a faulty gene, which increases dopamine release. Now, if cannabis is used in adolescence, then if a young person has 1 copy of this gene, the chances of a psychotic illness are raised by 5 to 6 times. If they are unlucky enough to inherit 2, 1 from each parent, the risk goes up tenfold.
You know you never get it. You gotta watch what you're doing. Yeah, yeah, don't you know? You know that.